in Westminster and in Brussels. It would appear the summit just a handful of hours away at the moment, possibly making backward action as a result of the DUP and a lot of problems with various commuter trains within London as the Extinction Rebellion protests are underway. But let's now turn, and very privileged to have in the studio Justin Welby, who is the Archbishop of Canterbury, coming here to take your calls and your questions. Thank you for coming in. I know I should address you as Your Grace, but I know you're well enough to call you Archbishop, so thank you very much, Archbishop. It just occurs to me, I can't call you Justin, can I, for heaven's sake?
Well, I think you probably could. You know,
I have known you for a while. Okay.
Okay.
No, it doesn't feel right. Archbishop,
right,
if you would allow, there's an incredible sense of anger around at the moment, whether it is the Brexit, those who perceive that we're not making enough progress, those who perceive we shouldn't have even been there in the first place, people being dragged from the roofs of commuter trains today. There's an unbridled anger, Archbishop. How is it to be addressed?
First of all, I think there has to be a decision that we need to address it. And certainly I'm working very hard with faith leaders and with non-faith leaders in addressing this issue, with trying to find ways where we can disagree well. No country agrees the whole time, unless you're North Korea or somewhere. But in this country, we need to disagree well. But
we're not anymore.
We appear to be hooked on anger and in sort of echo chambers of enmity. And everyone has to make the decision. They're going to reach out to people. It's something that only the people of this country can do. We're such an extraordinary country, such a remarkable one with such fabulous history. The first point, if you're addicted to something, is to decide you want to end it, to end that addiction. And that means you have to take concrete steps to reach out. And I think we've, for all kinds of complicated reasons, and often with a lot of justification, people feel an immense sense of frustration and anger. And I hear this the whole time. And there's a lack of forgiveness. When people slip up, we don't forgive any longer. We don't say, well, they're human, everybody makes mistakes. It's, we're going to get them. We're going to get them. And that is a decision that has to be taken by every individual, but we also have to find places and make spaces in which people can meet those they disagree with, see their human beings, not just engage with them over Twitter and on social media. I
want to come to social media. If you'll allow that anger sometimes becomes fear, and down the centuries, people have turned to their churches or their temples or their synagogues at times of fear.
Indeed.
What role do you and the people who work with you of all faiths play now? Because people are both angry and they are fearful, Archbishop.
I think they're fearful. I've just come back for 2.5 days in Hereford Diocese and listening to farmers, hill farmers, sheep and cattle mainly, some arable. And there is a real sense of anxiety and fear as to what the next few months could bring. And these are people who voted to leave the EU. So uncertainty leads to fear, fear leads to anger, anger leads to enmity and to striking out at people. What can the Church do? Well, first of all, the Church needs to make itself available. The Church of England has 12,500, if you like, branches in every community in England. Other churches have them also. We need to have our buildings open. We need to be places where people can meet and know there's hope whatever happens. I travel hugely. This autumn I've been in Sri Lanka to visit the people who were caught up in the bombs on Easter Day. Do you remember those?
I do. Horrific.
And I met
going to church.
Just going to church. And I met the kids who were caught up in the bombs. Some orphaned. You could still feel on their calves, on their legs, the ball bearings that had gone into the leg. They were there. I said to one of them, little 7-8-year-old, are you frightened coming today? And she said, I'm frightened, but I know that God loves me. Now, if they can conquer their fears, we can conquer our fears. And that means finding places where we meet those who disagree, love them as human beings. And the churches need to make themselves available for that, and we're doing that.
And lastly, before we go to the calls, you mentioned social media. Has social media made society a better, a poorer place, a rougher place, an angrier place? How would you describe it?
I think social media has, in many societies, including this one, broken down isolation, given people opportunities for keeping in contact with friends. It's done the most amazing things. But on the other hand, it does create these echo chambers of enmity, where the only voices you hear are the ones that agree with you and who hate the people you disagree with. And that sort of winds people up. So use social media to listen to those you disagree with and be respectful, be responsible, and answer them, but in a way that shows you know they're human beings.
We're going to be talking more about what you and some of your colleagues are doing as regards aspects of mental health later this week. Let's get a couple of calls underway just so people have the opportunity to speak there with the Archbishop. And first up, James in Barnes. James, you're through to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Go ahead. Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nick, and good morning, Archbishop. And
good morning,
James.
James.
Speaking to you. Archbishop, you're a good man, I believe that, but I'm very worried. I see the Church of England becoming one of a political correct trinity, shared with the BBC and the Guardian, when surely, I mean, it is the job of the Church to be inspiring our individual spiritual development and, working out our own salvation and you're waking ourselves to the glory and wonder of the creation. And you mentioned, about addiction, and I think your parallel, your example is very good. But any addict will tell you that the very first lines, the first pledge that an addict makes is, "I am responsible," and that surely it's just the Church's job to teach us how to develop our consciences, and through prayer. And you are treading on very thin ice, I believe, in getting church involved in taking political sides. And we all know.
And just give me an example, James. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but it's because so many people want to speak. Just give me an example where you would suggest that possibly the Archbishop has transgressed this line. Just one or two examples so that I can put to him.
Well, I would suggest in terms of his speeches, as you mentioned, in the House of Lords, where his sympathies are apparent. And it
sympathies,
then tends to bring
sympathies concerning, I get, do you mean Brexit? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
yeah.
Brexit.
Okay, right.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. Okay. Stay on the line if you would. Right, you're part of the Holy Trinity, well, not you personally, the Church of England, the BBC and the Guardian, and you've strayed into political areas and arena. Archbishop.
Well, first of all, my sympathies are not particularly apparent. I had sympathies before the referendum, as everyone did. And since then, I say we voted. That's what we got to do. The bishops published a letter a couple of weeks ago, which said we've got to leave well, and we've got to respect the whole referendum, the 52 and the 48. They've got to be respected and treated properly. Secondly, Jesus was intensely political. Look at the Magnificat. We're going to throw down the rich and feed the hungry, he says, in the Magnificat, or rather Mary says. Mary says we're going to cast the powerful down from their thrones and lift up the poor and weak. And that's pretty political stuff. It was actually banned in parts of the empire because it was seen to be too dangerous in the 19th century. I've just come back from 2.5 days, 30 meetings in Hereford Diocese, preaching the gospel, talking to people about Jesus Christ, about prayer, encouraging spiritual life in small villages and large centres. And that is what I do the whole time. And whenever I talk about politics, it's about the things that Jesus has taught me to talk about. The Bible says, let justice roll down like rivers and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. It puts together good living and good politics. And the Bible is as clear as anything could be, and that's where I take my cue.
Quick response from you, James.
Well, Archbishop, I think the greatest poverty in the world is the poverty of spirit, and I think it is your job, if I might be so bold as to say, is to develop help us to learn how to develop our poverty of spirit into a richness of spirit, and that involves a mystery and it involves wonder rather than just wondering why. And that is where we need teaching, and that is where it's a much longer and a more difficult job. But we have wandered far away, I believe, from the true message of Christianity. And there are 250 million people in the world who are being persecuted of the Christian faith, and I think that is where much of your energy should be directed.
And I've just, in fact, come back from Sri Lanka, where I was with those who'd been bombed on Easter Sunday. I'm just off to another country next week where I will be with those caught up in war. And I've spent a great deal of time, I spend the largest part of my time with Christians all around the world caught up in persecution, in poverty, in conflict, seeking to mediate and seeking to make peace, because that's what Jesus takes us to.
James, thank you. Simon in Brixton, you're through to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Simon, good morning.
Oh, good morning. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And on that note, I disagree with the previous caller. I think the biggest poverty in the world is human poverty and desperate poverty, often caused by climate change. And I think a lot of people are fed up with lots of sermons just focusing on Jesus died for sin. So therefore, will you make it compulsory for every Church of England church to have at least one sermon a year on climate change and the environment and the solutions, please?
Thank you, Simon. These two calls just show the breadth of opinion there is.
What a great job you've got.
Oh, it's fun. It's huge fun. It's a great privilege to have this job. Simon, we have, over the last few years, introduced not just a Sunday, but a season, which is September-ish, goes into October, called the Season of Creation, in which we focus on the issues of treasuring our creation, on which God has given us with responsibility to steward it. And again, in listening to Anglicans around the world, and remember the average Anglican is a woman in sub-Saharan Africa on less than $4 a day in an area of conflict or persecution. In listening, I remember a guy from Fiji 18 months ago saying to me, "For you, climate change is something about the future. For us, it is life and death today." So this is one of our highest priorities. I really agree with you, but I think we have responded to that. We have a whole season in the year where we focus on issues of creation, of climate change, of changing what we do. But at its heart, where I disagree with you, is we need to be preaching about Jesus Christ. We need to be sharing that in Jesus Christ is the answer to every human problem, especially and including the treasuring of creation.
You mentioned, Archbishop, that Jesus was a very political animal, if I may use that word. Would he have supported Extinction Rebellion?
I think he would certainly. The Bible teaches, and he was deeply embedded in this, teaches wonder at the creation and the stewardship of creation. I have no idea whether he would support Extinction Rebellion.
What about you?
I certainly support their aims. I don't always support their methods.
And their aims being a greater awareness?
To raise the awareness that we are facing a genuine emergency, a climate emergency.
So before we go to the next call, Jason, where do you diverge from their methods? Where do they go too far? If we look at the tube train today.
Well, as my daughter this morning, as she was going off to work, she showed me the clip, and she said, "You know, Dad, they're not investment bankers going to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. They're probably people on hourly pay who might not even have a job." And I think we have to start on all these things with respect for the human being. And you can be disrespectful in the way you demonstrate, and you can be disrespectful in the way you treat those who are demonstrating. We believe in free speech. I am deeply committed to robust free speech and encourage it in the church and outside it. But we just have to think, whose lives are we making not just more difficult, but possibly catastrophically more difficult?
So I take from that not a great deal of support for the actions at Canning Town.
No support for Canning Town.
Now, tomorrow you and colleagues are hosting a conference concerning mental health. Can you give us more details on that, Archbishop?
Yeah, it's faith and mental health. We've got people of different faiths and no faith coming. This has been one of the biggest crises we're facing and we've become more aware of. And the crisis is not mental health. There's always been mental health issues. We're recognising it, and there is still a stigma attached to it. And it's a crisis of attitude that needs to change. Mental ill health is just like physical ill health. It's not visible. And we have to treat people as people who are ill. So tomorrow is about tackling issues of stigma, making it easier to speak. The Children's Society is a brilliant thing. Last week reported 250,000 children.
That's horrific. Where is the stigma still present then? In the workplace? Where is it?
It's in the workplace. It's in attitudes. In the workplace, many companies and employers have improved enormously, where if someone has a mental ill health problem, they treat it as they would a physical ill health problem. But there are still many where, you'll be edged out, where there will be people who'll run away when a friend or a member of the family has mental ill health. It's treated as sort of, sometimes a bit like leprosy in the Middle Ages, unclean, keep away. When what people need when they're ill is to be listened to know they've got company and support, and that they're loved.
How important have the actions of the respective houses of Cambridge and Sussex been with this, the princes?
Oh, I think, like so much that they do, it's been the critical turning point. They have made a huge and massive difference. Immense courage in their transparency.
Why courage, Archbishop?
Because they were the ones who broke the ice. They were the ones who said, the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, he was the one who said, I had problems. That it just sets such an example. It enables people to say to their friends, I've got a problem. This is not going well. To go to their GP and say, I've got a problem. To be open about it. Last week, I said something publicly about the fact that last year I realised I was depressed. And if I hadn't had that kind of example, and actually another daughter's example who's been very public about her own mental ill health, she gave me the courage to say, this is a problem. It's not a fatal problem. It doesn't mean I can't be Archbishop. It's just an illness that's got to be dealt with. I have asthma. I have some depression. I take an inhaler. I go and see the GP and get some help.
Okay. Do you think in any way, lastly, before we go back to the calls, Ricky, you'll be the next caller, has the concern and the fear and the angst over Brexit, has that fueled some people's mental health issues?
I'm not enough of an expert to say so, but I know that fear and uncertainty are really unhelpful for people who may already have problems with anxiety and depression.
Isn't it, Archbishop?
Well, it certainly isn't. It doesn't help the atmosphere, and hatred is a really bad thing. It's another reason. We want everyone in this country, we all do. It's a great country. We want people to flourish. Hatred, bitterness, the kind of scenes we saw this morning, the kind of language that's often used, the abuse of social media, those are things that do aggravate, that is well proven, seriously aggravate mental ill health.
Let's go back to call, and good luck with you and your colleagues for the conference tomorrow. Ricky in Hounslow. Ricky, you're through to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Go ahead. Good morning.
Hi there. Good morning. Good morning, Archbishop.
Good morning, Ricky.
Hi there. Firstly, just to point out, I am a gay parent of a 5-year-old, and my son actually came from an abusive home, so it's quite a bad, horrible story of his history. But I just wanted to just talk a bit about the LGBT teaching, and seeing that given the church and religion's historical intolerance generally to the LGBT community, would you, as the Archbishop, support ending the protests of the LGBT teaching that have been happening in Birmingham, for example?
These are the protests, of course, that are taking place outside of Birmingham School by certain parents who are angry with the fact that there is LGBT classes for their primary school children. Archbishop.
First of all, you are absolutely right, Ricky. The church has historically been deeply intolerant with society as a whole, but the church has no excuse. Jesus said to someone someone dragged up in front of him, those without sin cast the first stone. And we shouldn't be throwing stones. And I'm really, really sorry and I feel a constant sadness at the way that we have, and in many places, very much still do treat LGBT people. Secondly, the Birmingham one, as I said earlier, I think we need robust free speech, but we must not intimidate, and robust free speech needs to be carried on in a way that fully respects the humanity of the other, whether they're gay or whether they are concerned about teaching in the school. It's really important that parents can say, I don't agree with this, but it has to be in a way that doesn't threaten, doesn't cause fear, and is a sensible discussion. You will not deal with anti-gay prejudice by banning it. It simply goes underground. You've got to enable people to meet people who are gay, to listen to them, to realise this is someone with a human being, with a 5-year-old kid who loves the kid, who's doing amazing work in bringing him up after after having lived in an abusive home. When they see that, there will always be sort of people at one end or the other who are utterly extreme and just hate everyone who disagrees with them, and that we have to stop. And hate speech is completely unacceptable, but we do need to create safe spaces for conversation.
So the classes should continue in those schools, LGBT teaching for primary school children, I assume you'd say age appropriate.
It has to be age appropriate. It has to be, and that I think is one of the questions, it has to be age appropriate. It has to make sure that people realise the reality of people's lives. Now, where I don't know about age appropriate is the big question. Content is the big question. It needs to be done in a way that enables people to listen to one another. It's the point you made at the beginning. We've got an atmosphere of hatred and enmity, and every single situation is made binary. It's either all this or it's all that. Life's much more complicated than that. The reason I'm a Christian is God came into the middle of the complexity. He didn't simplify it, he embraced it. It's what we need to do.
And why have we lost the ability to forgive? Because it seems if someone is found to have, and I'm not condoning it even, someone is found to have darkened their face for a party 20 years ago and immediately their whole career is in jeopardy or their political future lies in ruins, and they say sorry for something they did 20 years ago, we seem to have lost the ability to forgive.
I think that is a really, really serious question. I think particularly when we look at political leaders, losing the ability to forgive means you'll get really bad political leaders because everyone has made mess-ups in their
if you look
life.
at Justin Trudeau, he's obviously a decent bloke. And his career...
Yeah, I would imagine he is.
Yeah, and yet 20 years ago, he decides to darken
and he said sorry, and at some point you have to say, you're a muppet, you shouldn't have done that, but okay, let's move on.
The world moves on. Ricky, thank you. We must move on. Just briefly, you mentioned prejudice. I'm getting some texts and emails to ask you your views of what took place in the Bulgaria versus England football game. I can't from memory recall how much of a sports lover you are, but you'll be aware of the game, and I would imagine you'll be aware of the hideous racist abuse that a number of the black lads received.
I am very aware of the game. Sports lover, I think, might be overdoing it. I have to ask which end of a football to kick.
Oh, right, okay.
But I was aware. I saw the scenes on the telly like everyone else. I mean, that is a classic case of not respecting human beings. It was appalling, absolutely disgusting behaviour. It has to be called out. UEFA has to take steps on that and make sure that it costs any team where their supporters do this, and it has to be rigorous.
But
and
typically
I think
fines are £15,000.
Oh well, I mean that's a joke, isn't it? That's
I would
a
have
joke.
said so. Yes.
I think if I remember rightly, in the 80s when there was a lot of football hooliganism in the UK. You're so much younger than me, Nick. You probably don't remember
3
this.
years younger than you.
You probably don't remember this, but didn't they have a way, for instance, of saying that you will play without any of your supporters present?
Yes, they can do, and also they can ban you from European competition for X years.
Well, I think we have to look at really serious things where people know that they are simply going to be disqualified because it just isn't tolerable. People are born, they're born as they are. It's like what we were just talking about. People are born as they are. They need to be loved as they are.
Move to other questions. Haval in Lewisham. Haval, you're on the radio through to the Archbishop. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick, and
Hello,
good morning, Archbishop. Thank you for taking my call.
Good morning, Haval.
I'm a Christian Kurd from Turkey, and over the past few days, 2 weeks, we've seen the events of following the Turkish invasion of northern Syria, which threatens the return of ISIS and other extremist groups to the scene. ISIS threatens the very existence of the Christian faith in the Middle East.
It does.
Christians were driven out of their churches, out of their land, out of their homes. They were killed, persecuted terribly. The Kurds were the only force that were able, with the help of the allies, to defeat ISIS militarily on the ground. And although they defeated them militarily, the ideology is still there.
I've got to move you to a question. Haval, I'm so sorry. I've got to move you to a question, sir. Yes.
Now that they've been abandoned by their allies, does the Christian West have the moral and biblical obligation to support the Kurds against the atrocities of IS and the Turkish regime?
The Christian moral and authority there. Haval, thank you, Archbishop.
They certainly, I think no one should do anything but admire the courage that was shown by Kurdish forces against IS. It was extraordinarily brave, and you're quite right in saying they were one of the key figures in dealing with IS. And the Kurds are one of those nations that have suffered from being used by other nations for centuries. You're quite right about the Christian position in the Middle East. I travel there a lot. I see it. I go into the refugee camps and into other places, and it is utterly heartbreaking how they suffer and what has been done to them. You cannot see it without weeping, and you cannot know about it without your heart being touched. I think at the moment, yes, there is the West must support peace. They must support peace. They must support those who are struggling against the kind of terrorism we've seen from IS, and that has to be a priority and a defence.
That means support the Kurds, Archbishop?
It means we have supported the Kurds in the past. The Turkish situation, I'm very aware that there are Christians in Turkey who are also vulnerable. I think the Turkish war, as we've discovered in our own country, war is never a solution. There has to be an end to this fighting in northern Syria.
But what does a nation like the UK do? What does an organisation such as the Church of England do?
Well, the Church of England supports the Christians there. We have very few Anglicans in that area, very few churches. We support the Christians there and will continue to support the Christians. And we've done so publicly, and we continue to do so publicly. I suspect the power of the UK by itself is negligible to make a difference there, to be absolutely honest. I think we don't have large numbers of troops on the ground or anything like that. But the West has to focus on this and not just on its own internal concerns.
And lastly on this, would you ever go so far as to question or even condemn the actions of President Trump, who seemed to bring this about in some way?
It's a really difficult question to answer, isn't it?
That's why I ask it. That's why I sit here.
I know. I think, I'm really careful about saying things in public that I haven't said in private, but I think we have to look at what's going on in the Middle East and call for the US government to act really responsibly to bring peace. Because the people who suffer in war, and I've been in many war zones, in areas of fighting, are the children, the women, the minorities. It's terrible. We need peace.
Has he been too divisive, though, President Trump?
I think that the actions taken by the US in the last week have certainly caused really serious problems, and he is the president. The buck stops with him. We
have time for one last quick question. Susan in Winchester, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. If you can put it in a sentence, I'd be jolly grateful. Susan, good morning to you.
Good morning. Morning, Archbishop.
Good morning, Susan.
In a sentence, do you support buffer zones around abortion clinics?
And that really is a sentence. This is the idea of local authorities putting what are called buffer zones around abortion clinics. So people are allowed to protest, but a certain distance for the purpose of debate, 250 yards. You cannot go as close as that.
Well, I'm sounding like a cracked record here, but I'm going to repeat myself again. Do we love each person, even those we disagree with? Jesus said, love God, love your neighbour, love your enemy. Everyone gets caught up. Even I am caught up in one of those, not the first one. Yes, I do, because people going to abortion clinics, whatever you think of abortion, they're human beings. You could say they're doing the wrong thing. You could say they're doing the right thing. You could say it's their right. You can say that the baby has rights. The Church of England is very clear on this. I won't get into the detail of that because we're running out of time. But the Church of England has a very clear view on that and had since the 80s. But how do we love the people who are going there, treat them as human beings and value and respect them?
Lastly, back to the conference that you host tomorrow. One figure that you briefly touched on that I looked at the research is the increasing problems of young people with mental health and emotional health issues. Why and how is that to be addressed? And again, I have to refer you to social media again.
I think you probably do. Thanks, Nick. The Children's Society, with Church of England body that deals with children, is one of the most effective groups working with young people in the country, probably. They did this research, showed 250,000 people between 7 and 13 suffering from deep grief in their own life and sadness and indeed mental health problems. Why? Social media has a lot to do with it. At that age, you're incredibly vulnerable to online bullying. Secondly, the pressure, the insecurity, the uncertainty in the world around them. I think there is an element to which we're much more open about it. They're willing to say it, and that's really healthy. We need to be a country of hope and a country that respects and seeks each other's flourishing, and a country that is resilient. You have to train people into resilience. It doesn't just happen, and you do it by strengthening their capacity to deal with the difficulties of life in education, in the household, in the family, and I would say through faith and through, I see the amazing work I've seen again over the last few days, church schools, teaching people of all faiths and none that there is how they can be resilient and strong and care for each other. Those sorts of things begin to eat into this problem.
Archbishop, I always enjoy our time together, but this is the most extraordinary event. I don't think anyone could have scripted this. I need to thank you for that. One of the people who's been arrested for sitting on the roof of a tube train is the Reverend Sue Parfitt from Bristol. So that's obviously someone who, I don't know whether you would know the Reverend Sue Parfitt, but...
I do not know the Reverend Sue Parfitt.
No, but she's one of the people who's decided to sit on the roof of a tube train.
And is she Anglican?
Well, she looks as though she's Anglican. Reverend Sue Parfitt from Bristol, she's clad in a similar attire to you.
Oh, well, there you are. Well, this is just a really good illustration of the fact that there are a million different approaches within the Church of England. I respect her convictions. I wouldn't have sat on a tube train.
Well, that would be a picture. If you would
Thanks
glue
for that.
yourself
You
to
could glue myself to a tube train. You could come and join me. We'd have a really interesting interview.
We'd need a big ladder to get me up there. Not so you, sir. Thank you. Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. Thank you for coming
Nick,
to the studio.
very, very much.
Here on LBC when news is next.
Boris Johnson has spoken to the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker over the phone before travelling to Brussels for an EU summit. There is hope a new Brexit deal will be signed off by European leaders, but